Hi everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Before we dive into today's emotional and powerful story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming true-to-life tales. If you believe that every voice deserves to be heard, and that stories like this can inspire change, hit like, share with your friends, and leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Now let's begin. Summer in Willow Creek had a scent all its own: pine wood, a hint of wild lavender growing by the roadside, and the earthy smell that rose from the ground after a night rain. Eleanor Sanders sat on the old porch swing of her weathered white house, holding a steaming cup of mint tea, her gaze drifting toward the rolling green hills bathed in morning light. The white wooden house where she now lived was built in 1932. Her father had nailed each board himself after marrying her mother, a red-haired woman of Irish descent whose laughter used to echo through these walls. That house had held all of Eleanor's childhood memories, both the sweet ones and the ones she had buried deep for more than half a century. Footsteps clattered and brought her back to the present. "Auntie Eleanor, look, I picked a whole bunch of wildflowers." It was Lily, the curly-haired 8-year-old girl from next door, holding a bright bouquet of golden daisies. Eleanor smiled. "They're beautiful. Bring them up here, and I'll find a vase." The girl ran inside cheerfully, leaving the scent of fresh flowers floating in the air. Eleanor sipped her tea again, then set the cup down. Her eyes lingered on the dirt road leading down to the town. A familiar ache rose in her chest. She was 72 this year. It had been over 50 years since she first left Willow Creek. She thought returning would feel strange, but it didn't. The town hadn't changed much. The same white fences, the same aging maple trees, the same neighbors peeking from behind lace curtains to gossip. Only she was no longer the same. Her hand instinctively touched her neck, where once she wore a plastic purple necklace. A cheap little thing, a birthday gift from her brother David on her 12th birthday. Everyone had called it adorable, but only Eleanor remembered the hug that came with it. Far too long, too tight. His hand was on her shoulder, but his fingers had wandered past where they should have stopped. Back then, she didn't have the words to name what she felt. She only knew it was wrong. Eleanor stood and walked slowly into the house. The living room walls were lined with old photographs. Her and her mother in the tomato garden, her high school graduation, a picture of her speaking at a children's rights conference. But not a single photo of her father or her brother remained. Not because she had forgotten, because she had chosen not to remember. She stopped in front of a small mirror near the bookshelf and looked at the deeply lined face staring back. Her eyes were still sharp, but behind them, there lived something that had never been spoken, a wound that had never been named. "Auntie Eleanor." Lily's voice echoed from the kitchen. "Where's the flower vase?" "On the shelf by the fireplace, sweetie." Eleanor called back. Lily was a special child. Her mother, a single mom, had escaped an abusive marriage and now worked night shifts at the local clinic. Eleanor adored them both. In Lily's eyes, she saw a reflection of herself, a little girl still searching for safety in the adults around her. Her throat tightened. She stepped back out onto the porch and rested her hand on the faded wooden railing. Eleanor's childhood in Willow Creek had not only been filled with the sound of crickets and summer breeze. It had also been filled with silence, the kind of silence that suffocates. Her father, Thomas Sanders, a tall, stoic war veteran, had always called David, her older brother, the pride of this family. David was the golden boy, smart, athletic, polite, never once sent to the principal's office. The entire town adored him. "Be more like him," her father used to say. "David will carry on the Sanders name. You're just a girl." Eleanor had always felt invisible in her own home. Her mother, a devout woman who believed in obedience, never dared challenge her husband. She loved Eleanor in her own quiet way, but never with enough courage to protect her. And then there were the nights. Nights when Eleanor would wake up in the dark, certain someone was standing outside her door. Nights when the door creaked open without a knock. Nights when an 8-year-old girl clutched her teddy bear and prayed, "Please don't let me wake up." And yet, each morning, the world reset itself. Breakfast was served. Her father read the paper. Her mother arranged flowers. David adjusted his shirt collar like a perfect angel. Only Eleanor was no longer just a child. A soft breeze rustled the maple trees in the yard. Eleanor inhaled deeply, then returned to the porch swing, where Lily was now seated, scribbling on a sketch pad with colored pencils. "Auntie Eleanor," Lily asked suddenly, "do you ever get sad?" The question caught her off guard. She looked at the girl, her gaze softening. "Yes, sweetheart. I've been sad many times." "What did you do when you were sad? Did you tell someone?" Eleanor stared out at the horizon. The sun was already starting to lower behind the hills. "There was a time I wanted to tell someone so badly," she said. "But no one listened." The girl was quiet for a moment, then asked, "If I tell you something someday, will you listen?" Eleanor looked at Lily for a long time. "I will always be here. Whenever you want to talk, I will listen." Lily beamed. Eleanor smiled back, though her heart clenched tightly in her chest. She knew, maybe, it was time to tell the story she had kept hidden for nearly a lifetime. Not to accuse, but so that children like Lily would never have to be silent the way she once was. Everyone in Willow Creek knew David Sanders. With his golden hair, a smile as bright as an autumn morning, and a steady gaze that always looked people straight in the eye, David could win over anyone he met. By 17, he was captain of the high school football team, a 3-time student of the year, a member of the church choir, and had never once been written up by a teacher. People called him Willow Creek's golden boy. "David is a real gem," the mothers would whisper to each other as he passed by. "Any girl who marries him is the luckiest girl alive." Eleanor's father, Mr. Thomas Sanders, was so proud of David it bordered on worship. "David will carry the family name," he often told his friends. "The boy has the makings of a leader." And Eleanor? She was just David's little sister. The brown-haired girl was always an afterthought at town parties, where adults would smile politely and say, "Oh, a David sister? He's such a remarkable young man." No one asked what she liked, how she was doing in school, or who she dreamed of becoming. Eleanor grew up in David's shadow, a shadow so large it stretched over their entire home. He was always composed, soft-spoken, the perfect son in their parents' eyes. He woke up early, studied hard, helped their mother with groceries. But only Eleanor knew that there were nights when he came home late, reeking of beer, his eyes cold and distant. When she turned 12, something shifted in the way David looked at her. It was no longer the gaze of a protective older brother. It was a gaze that made Eleanor's skin crawl. At first, it was small things. He would stroke her hair a little too long, hold her a bit too tightly in front of guests. On her 12th birthday, he gave her a plastic purple necklace. Everyone at the party said it was adorable. David hugged her in front of them all, a hug that lasted far too long, so long she couldn't breathe. She glanced at her mother, Mrs. Linda, who smiled gently, completely unaware. After the party, Eleanor placed the necklace in her desk drawer and locked it. She never wore it again. One day, when David entered her room without knocking, Eleanor gathered the courage to speak to her mother. "Mom, I don't feel comfortable when David comes into my room at night." Mrs. Linda looked up from her prayers, her expression clouded with worry. But then she rested a hand on Eleanor's shoulder and said softly, "David is your brother. He loves you. Don't overthink things, sweetheart. But there's nothing to worry about, dear. Just pray." Eleanor went silent. She left her mother's room with trembling hands and something inside her heart, something fragile, shattered. The one person she had hoped would believe her didn't. From then on, she stopped speaking. David's control over her grew stronger. When he saw Eleanor chatting with a boy at school, he pulled her aside afterward. "Respectable girls don't get too friendly with boys," he said coldly. She wasn't allowed to join social groups unless he approved. Once, she tried signing up for the art club, only for David to block her at the door. "That silly painting stuff won't do anything for the family," he snapped. Their parents never objected. To them, David was just being protective. Eleanor began keeping a diary, not to document joy, but to remind herself she still existed. One late afternoon, Eleanor sat on the porch steps with Mrs. Margaret, the elderly woman who lived alone next door. People in town called her strange, but Eleanor saw something familiar in her eyes. Tired, but not broken. "You all right, child?" Mrs. Margaret asked, her fingers calmly knitting a scarf. Eleanor hesitated. "Have you ever felt like something was wrong, but couldn't say it out loud?" The woman looked at her for a long moment before replying gently. "When you're ready to talk, talk. I'll listen, no matter what it is." Eleanor wanted to cry, but instead, she just nodded and walked home. She wasn't ready. Not yet. In the years that followed, Eleanor withdrew deeper into herself. She behaved exactly how everyone wanted her to behave. To the town, the Sanders family was a picture of perfection. A model father, a gentle mother, a successful son, a well-behaved daughter. But inside, Eleanor was just a small bird trapped in a golden cage. And that cage was growing tighter with every passing day. Winter in Willow Creek had a frightening kind of stillness. The wind howled through bare branches, snow fell quietly over rooftops, and every sound seemed to be swallowed up by a silence as thick and heavy as the woolen blankets that covered the town. In the small room at the end of the second-floor hallway, 13-year-old Eleanor Sanders lay stiff in her bed, arms wrapped tightly around an old teddy bear. Her eyes were shut, her breathing shallow. She wasn't sleeping. She hadn't truly slept in a long time. Every night, after the hallway light was turned off and her parents had gone to bed, Eleanor learned to listen carefully for the footsteps. Some nights passed in silence, but other nights her door creaked open without a knock. The floorboards groaned. "A familiar breath," and a chilling whisper, "Don't be scared, it's me." That night was no different. Eleanor had locked her door. She'd placed a chair under the handle. But David had his own key. When the hinges groaned softly, Eleanor held her breath. "Are you still awake?" His voice came low. She didn't answer. She tried to lie still, her heart pounding in her chest. David stepped closer to the bed and sat down gently on the edge. "You asleep already?" he murmured, his hand brushing her hair. Still, she didn't move. But when his hand slid from her hair down to the back of her nightgown, Eleanor flinched. She jerked upright instinctively, scooting toward the headboard. "Don't stop," she cried out, tears already filling her eyes. David grabbed her wrist. "Quiet. You'll wake Mom and Dad. You're overreacting." "Let me go," she shouted, panicking. In the struggle, Eleanor slipped off the edge of the bed. Her hips slammed hard against the wooden frame, sending a bolt of pain through her side. David, panting, stood still for a second. She saw his eyes, not brotherly, not kind, but blank, cold, and terrifying. After a moment, he turned, closed the door behind him, and walked away. The next morning, Eleanor woke with a deep bruise blooming across her left hip. Every movement sent jolts of pain through her side. She dragged herself into the bathroom, each step aching. Her mother, Linda, was folding towels nearby. When she saw Eleanor limping, she hurried over. "Eleanor, what happened?" The girl lowered her head, unable to meet her mother's eyes. I fell," she whispered. Linda lifted the hem of Eleanor's nightgown slightly, revealing the purplish-blue bruise. Her hand froze, then slowly pulled away. There was a long, heavy pause. She went to the medicine cabinet, pulled out a tin of herbal ointment, and quietly applied it to Eleanor's skin. Her hands trembled, but her eyes didn't shed a single tear. She asked nothing. Eleanor said nothing more. When the girl left the bathroom, she heard her mother sobbing softly. No sound, just breathless gasps held tightly in her chest. Silence. Once again, silence won. At school, Eleanor couldn't concentrate. She sat alone in the library, pretending to read, eyes glazed over. Whenever someone came too close, she flinched. The sound of doors opening made her jump. She started avoiding touch altogether, even from teachers or classmates. She stopped joining clubs. She barely spoke. One day, her homeroom teacher pulled her aside. "Eleanor, are you all right? You don't seem like yourself lately." She gave a small, practiced smile. "I'm just tired." She had become fluent in silence. She was an expert at hiding. That night, Eleanor wrote in her diary, "I'm sorry, Gu. I know I must stay quiet so the family won't fall apart. I have to stay quiet so Dad won't be ashamed." So Mom won't break down. But it hurts. I want to scream. I want to disappear. I don't know how much longer I can keep going. Tears soaked the page, smudging her words. Mrs. Margaret was the only one who noticed. One afternoon, as Eleanor slipped out to the backyard, the elderly woman called over the fence. "You're limping, sweetheart. Did you fall?" Eleanor looked down. "I used to limp like that too," Margaret said softly. "A long time ago. But no one believed me. No one listened." Eleanor said nothing, but her eyes filled with tears. "You don't have to say anything today," the woman continued gently. "But if you ever want to run away from that house, I'll help you." For the first time, Eleanor saw a glimpse of escape. She wasn't ready to take it. But Mrs. Margaret had planted something in her heart, a seed of hope. Spring in Willow Creek usually came with the scent of apple blossoms and the distant chime of church bells riding the wind. But for Eleanor Sanders, that particular spring brought no sense of hope, only the reminder that she was nearing her limit. That year, Eleanor turned 17. The bruises on her body no longer faded quickly like when she was 13. They lingered longer, turned deeper shades of purple. And every time she looked in the mirror, she saw someone else, someone hollow, with eyes that no longer held a child's light. To her parents, she was still the obedient daughter. To the neighbors, still David's little sister, the pride of Willow Creek. But only Eleanor lived the nightmare that repeated itself day after day, night after night. One afternoon in March, while she was putting away books in the school library, her literature teacher, Mrs. Thomas, approached her. "Did you know you've been selected for one of the state's creative writing scholarships this year?" Eleanor blinked. I didn't know, ma'am. It's for a residency program at Langley Girls Academy in Boston. Would you be interested in applying? They've already sent a letter of interest." She clutched the letter in her hands. Her heart pounded. A door, an escape, a real chance to leave Willow Creek behind. She carefully tucked the letter into her math notebook. No one could know. Not her father. Not David. Not even her mother. Mrs. Margaret was the first person she told. After reading the letter, the old woman nodded slowly. "Go, child. Don't wait." "But I don't know if I can." "You can. You must. If you stay here, you'll die. Maybe not your body, but your spirit." Eleanor held back her tears. That night, she quietly packed. One small backpack, a few sets of clothes, her diary, and an old photo of her mother as a young girl. She didn't take any photos of her father. None of David. And certainly not the cheap purple necklace from long ago. She left home at 3 a.m., walking over 2 miles in the dark to catch the first bus to Boston. Langley Girls Academy stood nestled between rows of maples and ivy-covered stone buildings, with brick paths and gardens blooming year-round. Eleanor could hardly believe it was real. People spoke softly. No one slammed her door open at night. No one watched where she went or questioned her silence. She had her own room with a lock, a window that opened to a garden, a bed that didn't creak under fear. For the first time in her life, she slept without waking up in the middle of the night. But the trauma didn't vanish so easily. One afternoon after class, Eleanor was invited to meet with Ms. Carter, the school's counselor, a soft-voiced woman with warm brown skin and a presence as gentle as the background music in a bookstore. "You can call me Eleanor, right?" "Yes." "Here," Ms. Carter said, "no one forces you to speak. But if you ever want to, I will listen." Eleanor was silent for a long while. And then, like a cracked glass finally spilling over, her tears came. She spoke. "No interruptions. No euphemisms." She told everything, from the early touches, the unspoken terror, the stolen nights, the voice of a brother whom everyone else admired. MS. Carter didn't flinch. She didn't gasp. She didn't rush to offer cliches. She simply stood, walked over, and embraced the trembling girl, and whispered, "None of it was your fault." From that day, Eleanor began her healing journey. She went to therapy regularly, joined support groups for abuse survivors, learned to breathe through panic, learned to draw boundaries, learned to say no, and, most difficult of all, learned to believe that she deserved to live a life of dignity. She started drawing again, then writing stories. She became an editor for the school magazine. Ms. Carter encouraged her to publish a short article about healing. For the first time, Eleanor saw her words printed and received with empathy instead of judgment. 10 years later, Eleanor became a literature teacher at a girls' high school. Not long after, she founded an organization called the Hope Lantern, dedicated to supporting girls who had been abandoned, abused, or silenced. She didn't return to Willow Creek for over 30 years. Not until Mrs. Margaret passed away, leaving her a small wooden house. Only then did Eleanor decide to go back. Not to confront, but to say, I survived, and now I will light the path for the ones who feel lost, just like I once was. The bell of St. Mary's Church rang exactly 7 times that evening. The old wooden pews were freshly polished. Candles flickered gently along the altar. The community hall at the back had been converted into a modest space for the town's first annual Youth Awareness Forum, organized in part by Willow Creek City Council, local clergy, and a woman many hadn't seen in decades. Eleanor Sanders. Word had spread quickly. She's back, they whispered. The girl who ran away. She teaches now, runs some organization in Boston. Some spoke with admiration, others with veiled skepticism. But nearly everyone showed up. Eleanor stood at the edge of the gathering, watching familiar faces fill the rows. Old neighbors, retired teachers, the grocer's wife, now gray-haired and walking with a cane. In the back, teenagers shifted in their seats, some scrolling their phones, others curious about why an elderly woman had been invited to speak. The mayor introduced her with polite respect. A daughter of Willow Creek, a survivor, an advocate, and the floor was hers. Eleanor walked slowly to the podium. She didn't hold notes. Didn't need to. Her eyes scanned the room. The same wooden beams overhead. The same scent of beeswax and hymnals. Her heart thudded, but it wasn't fear. It was memory. Echoes. Echoes of being silenced, of being disbelieved. She gripped the sides of the podium gently and spoke. Thank you for having me tonight. I wasn't sure I'd ever come back here. But sometimes, healing leads us full circle. She paused. People listened. Many of you knew me when I was young. Some of you knew my family. My father, Thomas Sanders. My mother, Linda. And, of course, David. The room shifted. A collective inhale. You knew the version of us that we showed the world. The perfect family. The respectable son. The obedient daughter. She looked down for a moment, then back up. But there were things you didn't see. Things I kept quiet because I thought silence was the only way to protect my family, to be a good girl. The room was so still you could hear the building settle. At the age of 8, I began waking up with fear. By 12, I was no longer a child. And by 17, I ran, not out of rebellion, but out of survival. She saw faces change. Some older women stared at her, their hands clasped tightly. A younger man in the third row suddenly looked up from his phone. A teenage girl in the back wiped her eyes. I'm not here to accuse. I'm not here to shame. I'm here to break the silence. Another pause. Silence is not safety. Silence is where harm grows roots. A murmur of emotion moved through the pews. When a child tells you something feels wrong, listen. When a teenager withdraws, ask gently. And when someone finally dares to speak, don't turn away because it's inconvenient or hard to believe. Eleanor's voice didn't waver. She didn't cry. She was steady as stone, but warm, resolute. I've spent the last 40 years helping girls like the one I used to be. And tonight, I want every young person in this room to hear this. If someone makes you uncomfortable, if someone crosses a boundary, it is not your fault. And you are not alone. Her words hung in the air. A long silence followed. Then soft, slow applause. It started with a woman in the front row, then a teenager, then the mayor, until the entire church was filled with clapping, not loud or performative, but deep, respectful, emotional. Eleanor smiled. Afterward, people lined up to speak with her. Some hugged her. Some said nothing, just squeezed her hand. A young mother, holding her daughter's hand tightly, whispered, "Thank you," for saying it out loud. A high school boy came up last. His voice was quiet. "My little sister," she said something. About my uncle. No one believed her. Not even me. But now, his voice cracked. "Now I do." Eleanor put a hand on his shoulder. It's never too late to listen, and it's never too late to change. That night, Eleanor stood alone on the steps of the church, the stars glimmering above Willow Creek. She had returned to the town that silenced her, not to seek revenge, but to offer something better: truth, light, a door where before there had only been walls. Mrs. Margaret had once told her, "When you're ready, speak. Someone will need to hear it." Eleanor now understood. The voice she'd once thought too small, too broken, was the voice that could shatter a cycle. She whispered into the cool night air, "You were wrong, David. I was never yours to silence." Then she turned and walked home, lantern in hand, lighting the way.